From the word go, the Switch has proven that in addition to being a great hybrid console that enables easier gaming on the TV or sitting next to your great Uncle Rick while he watches MASH reruns, it's also a kind of version 2.0 of the Wii U. Not all of the functionality is transferred over, but a decent chunk has, and in a much improved state. Of course, Nintendo would never say all of this themselves, but they've absolutely showed it as they've been using a very reliable tool to pad out their first-party gaps on the Switch Wii U ports. Subsequently, the Wii U is quickly running low on unique gaming experiences, but as it loses and the Switch gains, today we'll talk a bit about this phenomenon, how it's not quite as egregious as you might first suspect, and most importantly, rank every first-party Wii U port so far on the Nintendo Switch. Let's talk about it. Every time a new Switch port of a Wii U game is announced, a corner of the fandom lets out an exasperated sigh, and sometimes going so far as to say that the Switch is just a Wii U port machine. Obviously, this is hyperbole, but it's interesting to break it down, too. Recently, the next victim was snatched from the exhausted clutches of the Wii U library, Pikmin 3. This had been rumored for easily over a year at this point, so the announcement was less of a surprise and more of a relief that we don't have to keep bringing up this game in direct prediction videos. So Pikmin 3 will release in October of 2020. Wonderful. But how will this stack up against the infinite other ports of its kind? Or at least that's what the narrative would suggest, seeing as there are, in reality, only 9 of them. Out of the 48 Nintendo-published games on the Switch, give or take a few depending on your temperament, that's really not that bad. By and large, I stand by these ports since, if nothing else, they allow 80%, soon to be more, of Switch owners to catch up on franchise entries that released on a console they didn't even own. These games may be old since they first came out, but they're new to a lot of people and allow these franchises and development teams a better shot at success, which is really meaningful. But why do people seem to think this is so much of the library when it's less than 20% of just Nintendo published games? Well, I think the angle of the sentiment is not so much Switch focused as that the Wii U has a library that's slowly being rendered worthless. Some of this is obviously because many of its big hits have been ported, but also several of the rest of its big titles have just been replaced by their new and improved version on the Switch. I think these experiences contribute to the feeling that the Wii U's library is increasingly useless, but in its death came new life. Of the Switch, obviously. So now let's get to the fun part. Since the Switch launched, Nintendo has published 8 Wii U ports with 1 more confirmed on the way. So we're gonna rank each of them, place them on a tier list, and see where we wind up. All of these ports are well received and well reviewed games, so we're not rating the games themselves, but rather the quality of their Switch upgrades on 2 factors. Number 1, increased value for returning players, which will also encompass the idea of a deeper or more challenging gaming experience, even for new players. And number 2, increased value specifically for new players, which will also mean whether it helps lower the barrier of entry where necessary. Each of those will be scored out of 5, and then we'll have a miscellaneous column in case we need it. And we'll be going chronologically because that's, it's just a good way to do things. You ready? Ready. First up, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This set an awesome precedent with its new inclusions. All of the DLC characters, tracks, and cars, and so on were in the base game. A slightly hindered double item box from Double Dash also returned, and those boxes held new items used by new drivers driving in brand new cars. The biggest character additions, in my opinion, were definitely the Inklings as they continued the Nintendo Kart thing they'd been doing. Also, the game is now in 1080p instead of 720, but that's the case with most of these ports, and there's a faster 200cc mode. A huge change came with the battle mode. The maps were actually battle stages like in the old games, and old modes returned with a whole new one added. And the stages may not have been the coolest, but they were pretty nice. In a very opposite direction, the barrier of entry was also reduced, even for Mario Kart standards, with auto drive and auto turn. And a while later, Champion Link and gear was added as well as Labo integration. Obviously, we're starting out strong, but in my book, for the visual upgrades, new characters, carts, and items, new battle mode, 200cc, and lots of other features, this gets a 4.5 out of 5 for the value for returning players. The only thing really missing was a new cup. And because of the DLC being included, the lower barrier of entry, and the sheer content already included, it also gets a 4.5 for new players. I just wish there had been a toggle to choose whether you want the characters to unlock from the start, which they were, or you still wanted to do it yourself through the unlock challenges, which I would have chosen. And finally, we'll throw one miscellaneous point at it for the continuous updates with Champion Link, Labo, and so on. This brings its score to a whopping 10, starting right off with an S rank. Next up, later in 2017, was Pokken Tournament DX. Developed by Bandai, this deluxe version included all the DLC from the first, as well as the additional 3 characters from the arcade cabinets, a 3v3 team battle mode, online ranked play, friend-only group matches, and later updates with new paid DLC fighters and assists. In my opinion, almost all of these features were aimed at returning players, and it sounds like they were neat additions, but didn't do much to really change their worlds. So I'd probably give it a 2 out of 5 for returning players, but a 1 out of 5 for new players. There's a bit more content this go round, but the $15 per character pack for the DLC felt pretty steep. With the amount of work and balancing that surely goes into this kind of game, I wouldn't expect much more than this out of its deluxe port, so it's not that surprising, but the whole package could have benefited from, I don't know, an additional better fleshed out story mode, for example. All in all, the game's great, but the port itself just falls right in the high end of D tier. And speaking of ports with few additional upgrades, Bayonetta 1 and 2 came over with next to nothing to speak of, but it had an ace up its sleeve that I'll get to in a second. The games did run a good bit better, and there was new amiibo functionality, but that's about it as far as changes. So in terms of new additions, I'd say it's really a 2 out of 5 for returning players and 0 out of 5 for new ones. But its sleeve ace is its price point. Basically, this is a double pack for $60, which is a crazy value proposition, so really the games were half the price of the rest of these ports. I personally give that 4 extra miscellaneous points, bringing the pack solidly into C tier. Then the notorious Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze featuring Funky Mode. I've been thinking about making a video on this game alone, but I won't. Instead, I'll just say this. Funky Mode deserves more credit than it gets. Since quarantine, my wife has been playing more games with me and had fond memories of Donkey Kong as a kid, but Tropical Freeze is notoriously hard. It's definitely easier in 2-player, no doubt, but even then, it can still be a challenge. Funky Mode is meaningless to the veteran, but is absolutely an olive branch to the novice. His moveset makes the game easier, but also stuff like shop items being cheaper and the next level automatically unlocking when you're close to death and have beaten most of the one you're on. Safe to say, for additions, this is a 1 out of 5 for returning players for just performance improvements alone, but it's easily a 4 out of 5 for new, younger, or less experienced players. Funky Kong is a gentle soul, but the elephant in the room is it does get a -1 on miscellaneous for costing $10 more as a remake than when it first came out. That's pretty lame. So in the end, it lands in C tier. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition doesn't get talked about too much, but it does a pretty bang-up job in this specific fight. I don't really care about the Dynasty Warriors gameplay loop, but if we're talking about bang for your buck, this game delivers. Basically, every single thing from the Wii U and 3DS versions are brought together in one package here, which, hint hint, is a lot. So if you played one but not the other, there's a ton of content for you to discover. Also new enemies, characters, modes, and more makes this port easily a 4 out of 5 for returning players, and the sheer volume of content on hand makes it a 4 out of 5 for new folks. Again, it's not my kind of game, but if it speaks to you, this A tier port did a great job of coming over. Next, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. There were definitely improvements here, but also a few small downgrades. A few new Mario Odyssey levels were added, but at the expense of some of the 3D World levels. Furthermore, a free 2-player mode was added in an update, and new paid but pretty cheap DLC was added down the road. The controls also had a change, but not necessarily for the worse, just for the different. I'd give this one a 3 out of 5 for old and new players for all of these features, landing this port at a solid B. And then, New Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, yet another one that my wife and I have played a bunch together. And once again, this port gets a bad rap, but I've seen its effectiveness firsthand. No new stages were added, but the Luigi U DLC was added in the pack, and some new characters as well, Peachette to be specific. And although this game isn't hard like Tropical Freeze is, my wife, for example, loves the extra mobility of Peachette. And that's pretty much it. Not a whole lot new was added, but an easy port and an easy 2 out of 5 in both categories, I think, leaving this at a C. Also, I can't believe that was the only Wii U port of 2019. Finally, we make it to 2020, and with it comes Tokyo Mirage Sessions Encore on Switch. This came with all previous DLC, new story content, new party members, new costumes, new music, as well as new mechanics and quality of life changes. All in all, this was lauded as being by far the best way to play Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Even if the game is pretty niche, the new content added and quality of life changes make it a 3.5 out of 5 for returning players and a 3 out of 5 for new ones. That's a B on our tier list. And finally, there's a few more we'd love to see, but the last confirmed one is of Pikmin 3 Deluxe. And while we can't concretely land anywhere on the quality of these editions yet, we know that the new prologue and epilogue stories are coming, 2-player co-op for the entire game, difficulty modes, achievements, quality of life upgrades, and more. For what it's worth, if each of these changes are done right, this could be one of the best ports yet. This is a game where playing co-op changes everything. Playing with a different difficulty could change everything. Additional stories could be amazing. The real questions here are how deep each of these are and also how the game controls. If they nail all of that, there's enough there to be a solid 5 out of 5 for old and new players alike, bringing it also up to S tier with Mario Kart. And there you have it, my definitive list of the Wii U ports on Switch. Now, I've just got to wonder, what changes would they need to make for Super Mario 3D World, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Star Fox Zero, the Zeldas, and all those to also bring them to S tier? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, because that's what I think. What do you think? What's your ranking of the quality of these ports? And what should they do to the remainder of those Wii U games destined to come over? Let me know all that and more in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll talk about those comments also on our podcast this weekend, so be sure to tune into that. That's about it from me. See y'all next time.